being able to find that work that motivates you every day. When even on the days when you wake up and you don't have it in you, the work itself pulls you towards it. I think being able to
Yeah.
find that role and then pursuing it and giving your all in that pursuit is professional success. And hopefully along the way, being able to help someone else as well.
You're listening to the East Meets West Pakistani Professional Journeys podcast, released bi-weekly every Sunday at 5 p.m. on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple iTunes. Welcome to the East Meets West Pakistani Professional Journeys podcast. Today we have Alizeh Jaffrey Zaidi, who completed her BBA from Schulich and her master's in Philanthropy and Non-Profit Leadership from Carleton University. She's worked at the Mississauga Food Bank as a donor engagement officer and the University of Guelph. Pleasure having you on, Alizeh.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
All right, so I guess we can kick it off. Do you mind just talking about your relation to Pakistan?
So I was born in Pakistan. My parents are both from Pakistan. And I was 3 years old when we moved abroad and first to the United States for a year and then ultimately to Canada when I was 4 years old. But I was always one of those Pakistani Canadian kids who visited a lot. So summer meant going home to Pakistan essentially. And that continued over the past few years, even as I've grown to. It's never been far away land. It's always been an integral part of my.
Okay. And how did you make sure that you maintained those cultural ties? Did you actually take the initiative in a sense, or was it more just you grew up, you just went with the flow kind of thing?
At home, I was always very deeply ingrained in Pakistani culture, and my parents did a great job with that. I'm grateful to them because I wouldn't have known the difference at that young age. I would have just, Canadian culture more
Yeah.
fully, but I feel like I had the opportunity to have the best of both sides, and I find that exciting.
Okay. And when you talked about the Canadian culture as well, but like in terms of how you meshed in, did you have struggles or any issues that you came across through your time in Canada in terms of integrating, or was it pretty seamless considering how young age you moved in?
So it was fairly seamless. My memories of arriving in Canada at the age of 4, when you're a child and you remember some things but not others. I remember we had a stopover in Detroit and we took a really small plane over, and it was snowing a lot. We arrived in February. I think one of the things where it's often a struggle, but it was something that my family navigated with language. So I was born speaking only Urdu, or I guess when I started speaking, it was pure Urdu. And it's a funny story. Actually, one day, you know how kids sometimes they're on the prayer mat, just like pretending to pray. And my mom overheard me praying to learn how to speak English. And I think I was like 3 at that time because I hadn't gone to school yet. It was around when I was starting, and I had no reason at that point. But I learned English, and by the time I came to Canada, I was fluent in English as well. But one of the things where I didn't end up struggling was also speaking Urdu. And at home, we always had a rule that I would speak Urdu because everywhere else I was speaking English. I remember my parents, who both speak fluent English, used to say, "We don't understand what you're saying." If I spoke English, no, because I would have lost that Urdu very easily. And it was also
Yeah,
recommended at school to have 2 languages if possible.
got you. So in university, you went into Schulich. Before that, did you know you were interested in business? How did you get exposed to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So before Schulich, I was always pretty set on entering the business world in some way or form. I learned from my dad and from my uncles as well. It was just the natural path forward. Sometimes it becomes family way. So I knew I wanted to go to business school. The path I ended up taking after was a little bit different. I was consulting stream at Schulich, and I did all the interviews. I had the offer, but then something else spoke to me on the nonprofit side. At that point, I realized that the nonprofit is also very much a part of the business sector. So I could use that.
Okay. And for students who are looking into, I know the cutoff for Schulich is very high. So in terms of getting that motivation and then pushing to getting into the university itself and that program specifically, do you have any advice for students to get to that finish line or?
Absolutely. Before university, I was doing the International Baccalaureate program, IB, and it's a very intense high school program in itself. And There were times when I found that very frustrating because like almost university level, but at that younger age. But just finding the perseverance there, I found that it really prepared me. So much is going to change after you go to university. And at that point, it feels like the decisions I'm making now are set in stone, but they really aren't. There was a point for about a year and a half where I really wanted to be a journalist because on the side, I loved to write. That's my passion. But I found that pursuing business studies made more sense. And then I could continue to write. And the writing has taken so many forms in my career and my personal life. So I would say for somebody who is very ambitious towards a program like Schulich, it can be stressful, but it's just one day at a time, putting in that work in the moment, not worrying about tomorrow, but learning for the learning itself rather than securing the grade, often secure the grade much better. So yeah,
Right.
that's what I think.
Were you involved in any extracurricular activities during your time in high school or?
I used to tutor French and I used to do DECA. So DECA was my main activity. And
Right.
for those who might not know, DECA is a business competition, which takes place at the regional and provincial and national level. So I used to do regional, and then each year I would also do provincials and played there. So that's another part for sure. Having strong extracurriculars make for a really good university application. And
Yeah.
often you end up wanting to do lots of things, but focusing in on one or two. So for me, it was DECA, tutoring, and lacrosse as my sport. So those are the three key things.
Got you. And once you started Schulich, it is a rigorous in terms of the course load and whatnot, but how did you go through that experience? And I'm assuming you probably did activities and probably summer placements. So how was that experience as well for you?
I feel like those 6 years, the last 2 years of high school and the 4 years of university, I feel like nobody really saw much of me. And it was
Yeah,
just
that's
constantly one thing after the other, whether it was assignments and all-nighters or extracurriculars. I found that sacrificing sleep had to be an option at that point, and we made those choices. But again, I reminded myself that this is happening today, but it won't be forever, and things eventually simmer down. There was no part of it that was necessarily easy, but you find those friendships as well with people who are going through the exact same thing and have the same stressors. And it ends up being very comforting and you find friendship in that. It was intense. I don't think about that time very often anymore, but it was good.
yeah, I feel consulting especially, right? The number of cases you have to go through, as well as just a level of detail for different segments within business. So, did you have a strategy for that, or was it you just learned as you went through, and that's the approach that you went with?
So, sorry, just to clarify the question, like a strategy for how I organize my time.
Yeah. So, in terms of because with consulting, it's case based most of the time, being able to study for it, prepare for it, like all that entire process, like how was that for you?
It was good. And I do remember quite a few case competitions at Schulich. One stood out in particular. It was a KPMG competition, and we placed quite high in that one, my team. So yeah, it involved a lot of prep.
Yeah.
My role for time management and organizing lots of various competing priorities is to compartmentalize. And when I'm thinking about one thing, I only think about that one thing, even if there are all these invasive, oh, I have to do this, I have to study for that final, I have to call this person back, I have to do that. I have to blank everything out in the moment and focus on that one thing. Sometimes we only achieve 80% of that, but it still goes a long way.
Okay. So you briefly talked about you starting consulting, you went into non-for-profit. So why did that switch happen and what was the trigger that got you into non-for-profit?
Yeah. So starting in my second year, I got a work study position on campus and I was working with York University's advancement team as a student alumni ambassador. So essentially that's telefundraising. And a lot of people who work in fundraising and development actually start that way. I just truly enjoyed it, just making those connections with our alumni and asking them for support. And I found that it wasn't scary for me to fundraise. It was very natural. I just had this mindset of, oh, I'm asking for someone else who's in need. So many students need the support in terms of scholarship. So if I can do this, if I can act on their behalf, then I'm happy to do it. And I guess that on their behalf part just stuck with me, just giving somebody a voice.
Yep.
I found that really wonderful. And so I started my second year, and as time went on, I ended up taking more responsibilities and different roles, working full time at the Alumni Investment Office over the summers. And as I was graduating, I had those key conversations with folks around me in the department, as well as external contacts. And I hadn't even realized how much opportunity exists in the nonprofit sector. But once I did, it became a very natural choice. And I had a job offer sitting there amongst all the others. And I hope I get a chance to talk about the process of getting that offer and those conversations from a Pakistani standpoint. But before we get to that, I just want to make a side note that those conversations are so important. Anytime you're at a crucial career stage, you're deciding on what university to attend, or you're deciding what career path to take, or even as a professional, you're thinking of a promotion or a job switch or whatever it might be, talk to people who've done it already. And their insight will carry you so much further than what one's own analysis can do, because we haven't experienced it ourselves and it's difficult to extrapolate. Seeing the good and the bad from someone who's been through it is so valuable.
Yeah. So in terms of building those connections or connecting with the right people, what was your approach for that? How did you connect with these people? And then how did you maintain that connection so you can secure your role once you graduated?
Absolutely. So the first step was to look at folks around me. So people who were successful within York University's Investment and Alumni Office. And I want to give a shout out to Maria Yurikova, because she's the one who hired me in that second year as a first-time fundraiser. And she was constantly there to give me advice throughout for the next several years. Through Maria, there were other contacts as well who I was able to speak to internally. And then building from there, there would literally be a process. I would look at taking that case study approach, almost treating individual careers as case studies and analyzing them. At that point, I had a list built out, successful directors of development. At that point, that's as far as my career planning had gone. This is where I want to end up. And I took a look at several folks' LinkedIn, their biographies on websites I could find, and built a little chart for myself, and then did a little bit of mapping at what career choices led them there and how I can build out my own career path that's set up for success accordingly.
Okay. So I'm assuming like within accounting, like there's so many different fields, like even like audit, FP&A, so on. So for non-for-profit, is it similar where there's like different sectors, but then within those sectors is like roles and whatnot? So specifically in your current sector, do you mind just giving more details on that?
Absolutely. So I'd say there are two levels for this. The first level is immediately, if you go into the nonprofit sector, you're either going into development or program. In a nutshell, development is the side of things that raises the funds, and programs is the side of things that spends the funds. So that's the first very basic level of picking your career and that segmentation. The second level, which is very crucial as well, is what type of organization do you want to work with? So what sector within the nonprofit sector? The major ones, there's an institutional and a grassroots there. So institutional would be your hospitals and universities for the most part. And grassroots, as well as small to medium-sized local organizations, regional organizations that are tackling a particular issue, they fall under a slightly different governance and slightly different model of business operation. Early on in my career, I did try out both pretty evenly. So my first role with York, getting a sense of the advancement team there, and of course beyond the tele fundraising as well, like I did with other roles as well. And then with Children's Aid Foundation of Canada, that was that first offer I accepted out of university and where I gained my foundational learning in the sector. And then with Food Bank Mississauga, of course, where I currently am. And then another opportunity with the institutional side was at the University of Guelph. Yeah, I wanted to build out kind of experience in both sides and to see where I feel like I had more of a good fit, where I felt like I could offer myself better.
Okay. And is there a specific role that propels you forward in terms of your experience and just the learning aspect on the job? Was there a specific one that stands out the most?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always specifically worked on the development side and in fundraising, and more specifically major gift fundraising. Even within fundraising, there are different kind of approaches you can take and different types of donors you can work with. And for the most part, I've been working with either mid-level or major gift donors. That's where I found that sweet spot and the way that I could best interact with donors and best secure support for the organizations that I'm working for.
Okay. And is there any advice you would like to give anyone who might be interested in non-for-profit but is like hesitant in going in? Do you have any just like to push the person forward or just to go for it?
Yeah, absolutely. And let's come back to the Pakistani Canadian side for a second, because it's unconventional to pursue a career in the nonprofit sector. And sometimes it's hard to make unconventional choices. But if you believe in something, pushing for it is always worthwhile. So when I was at the point, I finished my exams. I had a couple of projects for my capstone due at Schulich. I had all my job offers and coaching at that point, basically. And I was 99.9% sure that I was accepting the job offer in the nonprofit sector. And it was a coordinator role, a development coordinator role, as opposed to going into, for example, a rotational program, really the other options I had on the table. So it was a coordinator role and it was paying significantly lower than the other one. And it was something very unknown. So I brought this forward, and in Pakistani families, the wonderful thing is that we discuss everything and we
Yeah.
have our elders to advise us for the most part. And so I had those conversations and I told my parents that this is what I'd like to do. And they'd seen how I had been progressing at the advancement office and it didn't come as a surprise. I remember like they would always be very proud because I was breaking fundraising records pretty consistently at York.
Nice.
So I came to them with this, but even when I had that discussion, I could sense the shock, and especially on my dad's side. My papa was 100% sure I was going to be a consultant, and like there was an element of confusion of why beta, are you choosing this, which is so different.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to have those conversations, and I know sometimes it can be a little bit intimidating to approach our elders with those conversations. But in my experience, my parents were very receptive and they had a lot of questions and they had a little bit of pushback initially, just because there were a lot of unknown factors. But then again, bringing out those kind of career mapping charts and bringing out those examples and bringing out the diversity element and how I, as a person who wears a hijab, as a woman, as a first generation Canadian with a Schulich education, how can I best dedicate myself? And I thought it was to this sector. Eventually we came to that, okay, sure, try it out. Why not? So that's where I feel like that's where the hesitation might come from. The other side of that, not so much like what others will say, but internally, there might be some hesitation again because it is a little bit unknown. I would say anytime you
Yeah.
venture into something unknown, you have to have a pretty solid plan built out internally. If you enter the nonprofit sector, I would say do some planning beforehand in terms of at least 5 to 6 years worth of goals and where you want your career to hit each time. And I think you'll be golden.
Yeah, I really liked your point where you said that if you have a solid presentation or a detailed breakdown of why you're doing a certain task, then a lot of parents normally do understand. It's not on a whim that you decided to go for it. So that's really important, especially in our culture as well. Um,
Exactly.
do you mind just sharing a little bit about your experience in the food bank in terms of what that involved and what was it like?
Yeah, I love this story. So I'd been working as a development coordinator, which is like the entry level essentially, for about 2 years at that. 2 years and a couple months. And I knew at that point that I wanted to be having face-to-face donor interaction and moving up in my career at that stage. So I was looking for roles. I'd already started building a small portfolio, even at Children's Aid Foundation in that coordinator role, but I was ready to do more. So I applied to a few roles. And when the food bank role came up, it was contract one really great piece of advice I received just shortly before I came across that role was to look for maternity leave coverage. Because at that career stage, when you're young, especially in the nonprofit sector, a lot of folks get their next step by essentially doing a trial run covering a maternity leave. And that way the organization can test you out before moving into a more of a full-time role. So it was a
Yep.
maternity leave cover that I took on at the food bank on the foundations and grants fundraising side. And it was a really exciting time. It was at the peak of COVID, August 2020. And I remember, again, having that conversation. And my mom asked me, she said, "You're taking a 1-year contract and we're at a very unpredictable time. How will you feel career-wise if at the end of this year you don't have any prospects? Do you have a plan to move forward?" And I told her that because I already know that if in 1 year I am still working at the coordinator level, for me personally, that won't be fulfilling, that I might as well take the chance. So I did that for 1 year. And the colleague I was covering came back from her maternity leave. And at that point, I really wanted to stay. And the food bank really wanted me to stay, but there was no role. I did a bit of a job search and I transitioned right away to the University of Guelph, again on a contract. And toward the end of that contract, there was another maternity leave cover open at the food bank. And I wanted to come back because food security is really meaningful to me personally. And I'm glad to touch on that later as well.
Yeah.
Came back. And then about 3 months into that contract, there was a full-time role available on the major gift side. And I successfully moved into that. And I'm so grateful for the work I get to do every day.
So what's your inspiration in continuing to be in the role and then also helping others as well?
And absolutely. I think for everyone who works in nonprofit, there is a particular cause that speaks to them and that drives them
Yeah.
forward. And that same fundraiser can work for another organization and be effective. But in that one cause, then you do your best work, right? So for me, it's food security for sure. And I think there is a lot of cultural and faith-based context that goes with that. Growing up, I always heard the stories how deeply rooted it is in our faith to make sure that the people around who have enough to eat. I did a piece for Carleton University for their online magazine, which talks a little bit more about essentially the patron saint of philanthropy. Prophet Muhammad's grandson, Hassan ibn Ali, had significant teaching about how to operate in the world of philanthropy, how to be effective in your philanthropy. And he taught a great deal about food security and making sure that no one in your community is experiencing hunger. So I take a lot of those teachings and put them forward as well in my work every day.
Got you. That's awesome. And in terms of balancing, do you find it a good balance in terms of the work life in non-for-profit, or do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
I think so. I think some of the most formative years of my life so far have happened since I graduated university and in the 6 years since. I had the opportunity to do a master's program in philanthropy and nonprofit leadership, which I did full time in order to be eligible for that scholarship. So it was full time, but it was online. So I balanced that alongside my full time work from 2020 to essentially the end of 2021. And then a few months later, I got engaged and married. Through all of these life changes as well, I felt very blessed to have that work-life balance. And I think it's excellent in this sector, to be honest. The one thing I'll touch on is that you bring a lot of it home emotionally. When you work with clients and you hear their stories and you dive deep into that experience of hunger in your community, and especially knowing the statistics, the one that shocked me the most personally is that 8% of the city of Mississauga needs a food bank. That's 50,000 people every year.
Yep.
You know, you have those evenings when you come home and cry at the dinner table, but that's beautiful part of working in this sector because it also drives you forward every day in your work and adds that passion to fuel our everyday.
Got you. So I guess in terms of giving advice to your past self, and you're speaking to yourself in first year, would there be any messages or advice you would give?
So a good one.
Tough one for sure.
I guess I would say that tomorrow will be more interesting than today. And there's always something to look forward to. So in the moments when it's really grueling, I think we all have those moments of, is this worth it, what I'm doing right now? Especially when we're in university or in high school or like planning for a future. It most definitely is worth it. And everything comes to its natural conclusion. I definitely had those moments when I was doing my master's as well, of feeling burnout. And I think that burnout is a very important part of life. We try to manage it as much as possible. But if we're burning out, then it means we're doing something. So
That's good advice for sure. It is hard in hindsight when you look back. It's a lot easier to say it, but in the moment, you're struggling through it. You have no idea. You're not looking forward. I liked your idea of focusing on tomorrow as opposed to thinking way ahead sometimes. It's a good way to narrow down your focus. In terms of the Pakistani culture, once you live long enough in the West, there are some things that might get pulled out or fallen on the side in terms of that cultural aspect. How did you maintain that point with Pakistani culture as you grew up in the West?
yeah, that's actually a really good question. It's a very important one. I'm glad we have a little bit more opportunity to talk about the Pakistani side of things. For me, I guess it was those visits. So as I was growing up, every summer we spent at least a month in Pakistan, and those memories and experiences that I built out would carry me through the rest of that year. So whatever stage I was at as I was growing up, I would get to experience the Pakistani side of that for about a month, and I feel like that immersive experience is what really went a long way. And that kind of slowed down a little bit as I was in university, just because of obviously you can't do a couple of weeks or a month every year, but we still do a couple of weeks every few years. And also with my family as well. I have cousins who are my age, and I remember when I used to come back at the end of the summer, just before school started, my cousins and I had a tradition. Well, my dad's sister would take us all back to school shopping in Pakistan, and we would get certain things. I used to get like my little thermos and my pencils and my lunchbox and everything, so that we could all three of us use the same thing, even if we were far apart. And yeah, I think it was called Booktown, that little store in Karachi. Like, it stayed with me, and then it just became integrated in that sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. Like it just the visits definitely help, I feel. Connecting with grandparents and relatives that you never knew. They're like they remember you as a kid and you have no idea sometimes who they might be, but
Very much.
it's a lot.
I think the other part of that is that it doesn't end there, right? Even at home, having the food, speaking the language, wearing the clothes for occasions only. It just all carries through nicely.
Awesome. So I guess we can end this off. So in terms of defining success, how would you define success? You can go either professionally or personal. Like I'll leave it open to you which one you want to share for.
I think that every person will have, to a certain measure, their own definition of success. For me, professionally, being able to find that work that motivates you every day. When even on the days when you wake up and you don't have it in you, the work itself pulls you towards it. I think being able to find that role and then pursuing it and giving your all in that pursuit is professional success. And hopefully along the way, being able to help someone else as well. And even if someone isn't working in the nonprofit sector, it's still possible every day. A word of advice, engaging in a workplace giving campaign, or mentoring someone. There's so many ways to be giving. So those are the measures of professional success. And then on a personal level, I think finding that fulfillment both internally and being a positive presence for those around you. So I feel blessed to have a wonderful relationship with my parents and a beautiful partnership with my husband, and hopefully to raise a family one day soon. And just making sure maintaining all of those things that are equally important and finding that balance with the work we do.
Awesome. No, that was great insight. I didn't even realize the different sectors as well. It was a great chat and thanks for sharing your experience.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.